The hotel room's crisp white sheets still held the warmth of two bodies as she reached for her phone on the nightstand. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the unfamiliar room. Beside her, he stirred slightly, his arm draped across her waist in casual intimacy that had become familiar over these 3 days. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. Checkout was in 2 hours. The conference was officially over. She should be packing, preparing for the flight home, rehearsing the stories she'd tell about keynote speakers and networking sessions. Instead, she found herself studying his sleeping face, tracing the line of his jaw with her eyes, feeling the pull of something she hadn't felt in years. "Stay," he'd whispered last night, his breath warm against her neck. "Tell him the conference got extended. 2 more days. That's all I'm asking. 2 more days." 48 hours stolen from a life that had become predictable, comfortable, and somehow suffocating. She thought about her husband back home, probably already at his desk, coffee growing cold as he worked through spreadsheets and conference calls. Reliable, steady, safe. When had safe become synonymous with boring? Her fingers hovered over her phone. The lie formed in her mind before she could second-guess it. She opened the message thread with her husband, looking at his last text from yesterday. "Hope the final day is going well. Miss you. Drive safe tomorrow." Simple. Loving. Trusting. The guilt twisted in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. She typed quickly, before courage could fail her. "Bad news, they've extended the conference 2 more days. Some crisis with the keynote for tomorrow, and they're asking senior attendees to stay for emergency sessions. I'm so sorry, honey. I know you were looking forward to me being home. I'll make it up to you when I get back. Love you." She hit send before she could reconsider. The response came faster than expected, and her heart jumped. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Oh no, that's disappointing. But I understand. Work comes first. Don't worry about anything here. I've got it all handled. Stay safe and learn lots. Love you too." The warmth in his words made the guilt burn hotter, but she forced herself to focus on the relief instead. He believed her. Of course he believed her. Why wouldn't he? In 10 years of marriage, she'd never given him a reason not to trust her. Until now. She set the phone down and turned to find him awake, watching her with dark eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facades. "Well," he asked, his voice still rough with sleep. 2 more days, she confirmed, trying to smile, trying to ignore how the words felt like ash in her mouth. He pulled her closer, and she let herself sink into the embrace, into the fantasy that this was her real life, that there would be no consequences, no reckoning. They had met at the opening mixer, a casual conversation about industry trends that had evolved into drinks, then dinner, then this. Each step had felt inevitable, like falling, and she had stopped trying to catch herself. "No regrets?" he asked, his lips against her temple. She thought about her answer. Thought about her husband's trusting response, about the home they'd built together, about the promises she'd made in a church surrounded by everyone they loved. Thought about how she'd become someone she didn't recognize, someone who lied easily and chose temporary passion over permanent commitment. "No regrets," she lied again, and wondered if this was who she was now, someone for whom lies came as naturally as breathing. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it, choosing instead to lose herself in arms that didn't belong to her, in a moment that couldn't last, in a decision that would reshape everything she thought she knew about herself and the life waiting for her at home. If only she had looked at that notification. If only she had seen the tag, the photo, the digital footprint of her betrayal spreading across social media where anyone could see. But she didn't look. Not yet. 300 miles away, her husband sat in his home office, the desk lamp casting a warm glow over the workspace where he'd spent countless evenings while she traveled for work. The message about the conference extension still glowed on his phone screen, each word a small detonation in the careful structure of his trust. He'd read it 3 times now, his coffee growing cold in the mug she'd given him last Christmas. "World's most patient husband" printed in cheerful letters that now felt like prophecy or mockery, he wasn't sure which. 2 more days. Emergency sessions. Senior attendees. The lies were almost artistic in their construction, specific enough to sound credible, vague enough to avoid verification. If he hadn't already known the truth, he might have believed her. Would have believed her. Had believed every other time. His phone sat beside his laptop, both screens telling different stories. On his phone, her loving message, apologetic and warm. On his laptop, a Facebook post from Sarah Chen, her co-worker, uploaded 2 hours ago. Conference crew living our best lives. So glad we extended the fun. The photo showed a group at a rooftop bar, conference badges conspicuously absent. And there, in the corner of the frame, slightly blurred but unmistakable, his wife, her head tilted back in laughter, a man's arm around her waist in a way that spoke of intimacy, not corporate camaraderie. He'd seen the post by accident, scrolling mindlessly through his feed during a coffee break. At first, his brain had simply refused to process what his eyes were seeing. That couldn't be her. Must be someone who looked similar. But then he'd zoomed in, enhanced the image, studied every pixel until denial became impossible. The conference had ended today. The schedule was public online. He'd checked it 3 times, hoping he'd misread something. The closing remarks had been at noon. There were no emergency sessions, no extensions. Just his wife, choosing to stay, choosing to lie, choosing someone else. The rage had come first, white-hot and consuming. He'd wanted to call her immediately, to scream, to demand explanations. His finger had hovered over her name in his contacts, ready to detonate everything with a single call. But something had stopped him. Maybe wisdom, maybe pride, maybe the same calculated patience that had made him successful in business. Acting on emotion was how people made mistakes, burned bridges they'd later wish they'd preserved, said things that couldn't be unsaid. So instead, he'd taken a breath. Then another. He'd closed the laptop, gone for a walk around the block, let the autumn air cool his heated thoughts. By the time he returned, the rage had crystallized into something colder, clearer, resolve. She wanted 2 more days? She could have them. She wanted to pretend everything was normal? He'd give her that illusion. Let her think she'd gotten away with it. Let her relax into her lies, enjoy her stolen time, believe that their life together would still be waiting when she returned. And while she did, he would prepare. He'd started with the practical matters, calling his attorney friend first. Hypothetically, he'd said, and laid out the situation in careful, emotionless terms. The advice was clear: document everything, secure finances, change the locks. Protect yourself legally before confrontation. Next, he'd called a locksmith. My wife's lost her keys, he'd explained, hating the lie even as he understood its necessity. I need the locks changed before she gets back. It's a surprise. I'm having new keys made with a special engraving. The locksmith would come tomorrow morning. He'd spent the afternoon quietly securing their shared accounts, his movements careful and methodical. He didn't drain them. That would be vindictive, cruel. But he separated his portion, protected what was his. He'd been the primary earner for years while she built her career. His attorney friend had been clear about what that meant legally. The note had taken longest to write. He'd gone through 7 drafts, each one either too angry or too conciliatory. Finally, he'd settled on something simple, something that would deliver the message without giving her ammunition to paint him as unreasonable. Take the extra 2 days. You'll need them. Your belongings will be in storage. The attorney's information is attached. I wish you'd just been honest. That would have hurt less than the lies. Now, as evening shadows lengthened across his office, he typed his response to her text. His fingers were steady, his words carefully chosen to give nothing away. Oh no, that's disappointing. But I understand. Work comes first. Don't worry about anything here. I've got it all handled. Stay safe and learn lots. Love you too. Each word was technically true. He did understand, understood that she'd made her choice. Work didn't come first, but something did, someone did. He wasn't worried. He was handling it. And there was love there still, or the ghost of it, mourning what they'd been before she'd chosen to destroy it. He hit send and watched the message deliver. Read. No response yet, probably too busy enjoying her freedom, her lies, her other life. 2 more days, she'd said. 2 more days for him to pack up a decade of marriage, to prepare for the moment when she'd return home expecting normalcy and instead find consequences. The 2 stolen days passed like scenes from someone else's life. She and Blake, she'd learned his name properly now, along with details that made him seem more real and therefore more dangerous, had abandoned the pretense of professionalism entirely. No more mentions of the conference, no more carefully maintained distance in public spaces. They'd explored the city like tourists, like lovers, like people without obligations waiting at home. He'd taken her to a rooftop restaurant where the city lights stretched to the horizon, to a jazz club tucked into a basement where the music made conversation unnecessary, to his hotel room where morning light found them tangled together, breathless and temporarily satisfied. She'd checked in with her husband twice a day, morning and evening messages that were masterpieces of mundane deception. Session on market trends was fascinating. Networking dinner ran late. Miss you, can't wait to be home. Each lie came easier than the last, the guilt fading into background noise she'd learned to ignore. His responses were perfect, supportive, understanding, trusting. Glad you're learning so much. Take your time, drive safe. House is quiet without you. Never a hint of suspicion, never a question that made her pause. She'd almost felt annoyed by how easily he accepted her story, how completely he trusted her. Didn't some part of him suspect? Shouldn't love come with intuition? But mostly, she felt relief. And underneath that, a growing sense of power. She was getting away with it. She'd created a parallel life, stolen these days from the mundane march of marriage, and no one would ever know. In a week, this would be a memory, something to sustain her through the monotony of routine. Blake had asked, on the last morning, if she'd leave her husband. They were having breakfast on his room's balcony, and the question hung in the air like smoke. I don't know, she'd answered honestly. This is different from my real life. It's an escape. But real life is complicated. We have a house, shared finances, a history. I can't just walk away from 10 years. But you could walk away from him. Blake's eyes were serious, maybe disappointed. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. I just know I'm not ready for this to end. But it had to end. The calendar was merciless in its progression. She'd packed her suitcase that final morning, exchanged a last kiss at the hotel room door, promised to stay in touch knowing they probably wouldn't. These things never survived reentry into real life. The drive home took 4 hours. She'd rehearsed her stories, organized her lies into a coherent narrative. She'd stopped at a highway rest stop to change from the dress she'd worn to lunch with Blake into something more appropriate for business travel. She'd checked her makeup, removed the lipstick that was too bold for her usual style, transformed back into the woman her husband knew. As the familiar streets of her neighborhood materialized around her, she felt the weight of reality settling back onto her shoulders. The house came into view, their house, with its blue shutters and the garden she'd planted 3 springs ago. Her husband's car in the driveway meant he was home, probably working in his office, ready to greet her with that patient smile. She pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, sat for a moment preparing her face, her story, her lies. Then she grabbed her suitcase from the trunk and walked to the front door, key in hand. The key slid into the lock. Turned. Stopped. She frowned. Tried again. The key went in but wouldn't turn, as if the mechanism had jammed. She jiggled it, applied more pressure. Nothing. Confused, she pulled out her phone to call him, tell him the lock was broken. But as she looked up from her screen, she noticed something white tucked into the doorframe. A folded piece of paper, her name written across it in his careful handwriting. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. The words blurred, then sharpened, then seemed to rearrange themselves into something that couldn't be real. Take the extra 2 days. You'll need them. Your belongings will be in storage. The attorney's information is attached. I wish you'd just been honest. That would have hurt less than the lies. The world tilted. She read it again, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. How could he know? She'd been so careful. The messages, the cover story, her phone. She opened Facebook with trembling fingers, searched for Sarah's name, scrolled back through posts. And there it was, uploaded 3 days ago, the rooftop bar, the group of them, and in the corner, captured in digital permanence, her head thrown back in laughter, Blake's arm around her waist, their body language telling a story words could never deny. The suitcase fell from her numb fingers. She tried her key again, desperately now, as if the lock might have magically reset itself. But the mechanism was new, she could see it now, the fresh brass catching the afternoon sunlight. He'd changed the locks. While she'd been living her lie, he'd been preparing for this moment. She pounded on the door, calling his name, but the house remained silent. She tried the side gate, locked. The back door, also locked. Every entrance sealed against her, as if the house itself had turned hostile, rejecting her like a body rejecting a foreign organ. Her phone rang. Not him. Her mother. She let it go to voicemail. Rang again. A friend. Voicemail. The world was continuing, oblivious to the fact that hers had just imploded. Finally, she collapsed onto the front steps, the note still clutched in her hand. The storage unit was in a facility 15 minutes from their house, she still thought, though the possessive no longer applied. The address had been at the bottom of the note, written in his meticulous handwriting alongside a unit number and a code for the lock. She'd sat on those front steps for 20 minutes, cycling through emotions like television channels. Disbelief, anger, humiliation, desperation. She'd called him 6 times. Each call went straight to voicemail, his voice on the recording painfully normal. You've reached David. Leave a message. That ordinary greeting, preserved from months ago when their life was still intact, now felt like archaeological evidence of a vanished civilization. She'd tried texting. Please answer. Let me explain. Then, when that yielded nothing, this isn't fair. You owe me a conversation. And finally, stripped of pride, please. I'm sorry. Please just talk to me. The messages showed as delivered but unread. He'd either blocked her or had the discipline to simply not look. She suspected the latter. He'd always been more controlled than her, more patient. It was one of the things that had attracted her to him initially and had slowly driven her away. His steadiness had become predictable, his patience had felt like complacency, his trust had seemed like naivety. But he'd known. For 3 days, while she'd been with Blake, while she'd been sending her carefully crafted messages, he'd known. Had he known before she left? Or had he discovered it during? The timeline mattered somehow, though she couldn't articulate why. Neighbors were starting to notice. Mrs. Patterson from next door had slowed her gardening to watch. The teenager across the street kept glancing over while washing his car. Soon the whole neighborhood would know, might already know, if he'd told anyone. The humiliation finally drove her to her car. She entered the storage facility address into her GPS with shaking hands and drove through streets that felt accusatory in their familiarity. Every landmark was a memory. The coffee shop where they'd had their first date, the park where he proposed, the grocery store where they'd argued over whether to buy organic or save money. The storage facility was industrial and impersonal. Rows of identical orange doors like metal containers for discarded lives. She found her unit and entered the code. The lock clicked open with a sound like a judge's gavel. Inside was her life, neatly boxed and labeled. He'd been thorough, she'd give him that. Every box was clearly marked: clothes, business, clothes, casual, shoes, books, personal items, bathroom. It looked like the work of days, not hours. He must have started the moment she'd sent that text about the extension. While she was laughing at the rooftop bar, he was packing her away. While she was in Blake's arms, he was labeling boxes like a shipping clerk processing inventory. The organization felt somehow worse than if he'd thrown everything in garbage bags. This was methodical, careful, final. There was no anger in these boxes, no vindictive destruction of her belongings. Just a cold, practical severing of their shared life, executed with the same efficiency he brought to his work projects. She opened one box at random: sentimental items. Inside were the framed photos from her dresser, their wedding day, vacations, holidays with family. He'd wrapped each one carefully in bubble wrap. Underneath was her jewelry box, the one he'd given her for their 5th anniversary. She opened it and found everything intact, including her wedding ring. No, wait. She looked at her hand, at the ring still circling her finger. This was a different ring, one she didn't recognize. She held it up to the light and saw the inscription inside, "All my tomorrows, D." The engagement ring he'd given her 10 years ago, the one she'd stopped wearing daily after a few years because it caught on things, because it was impractical for everyday wear. He'd kept it in his drawer, she'd forgotten it existed. The tears came then, sudden and choking. She sank onto the cold concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by boxes that represented a decade of shared life, holding a ring that represented promises she'd shattered. Her phone buzzed. Finally. But it wasn't him, it was an email from an attorney's office. "Thank you for your inquiry regarding legal representation. We have reviewed your potential case and must inform you that we cannot represent you due to a conflict of interest. Our firm is already representing the opposing party in this matter." She hadn't contacted an attorney, which meant he'd been thorough enough to retain the best family law firms in the area, preventing her from hiring them. It was a standard tactical move in divorces. Her friend's ex had done the same thing. The efficiency of it, the forward planning, made her feel like she'd never really known him at all. Another email, this one from their bank. "This message confirms the closure of joint account ending in 4732. Then another. "This message confirms your removal as authorized user on credit card ending in 8901. He was dismantling their financial life with the same systematic approach he'd used to pack her belongings. She checked her own account. He'd deposited money, she saw. Not everything, but enough to be fair, more than fair actually. He divided things equitably, even in his anger. Even in his betrayal, he was honorable. The realization made her cry harder. She didn't deserve his fairness. She deserved rage, deserved cruelty, deserved him taking everything and leaving her with nothing. 3 weeks had passed since she'd found herself locked out of her own life. She was living in an extended stay hotel now, the kind with a kitchenette and a weekly cleaning service, the kind for people in transition, between jobs, between homes, between versions of themselves. The boxes from storage had been moved into a small rented apartment she'd found through a desperate late-night search. 1 bedroom, beige carpet, a view of a parking lot. It cost nearly as much as their mortgage had, but it was hers alone now, along with all the bills and responsibilities she'd taken for granted when they were shared. The divorce papers had arrived via courier, clinical in their language, transforming a decade of marriage into bullet points and asset divisions. She'd hired an attorney finally, the 4th one she'd called, after learning that he'd indeed locked up the 3 best firms in the area. Her lawyer, young and eager, had reviewed the proposed settlement and pronounced it surprisingly generous. "He's being very fair," the attorney had said, sounding almost disappointed, as if fairness robbed her of something to fight for. More than fair, actually. He's not asking for spousal support despite having grounds for it, and he's proposing a clean split of assets despite being the primary earner. Most men in his position would be far more adversarial. Fair. That word again. It followed her everywhere, an indictment disguised as a compliment. She tried to contact him directly once more, showing up at his office building, planning to wait in the lobby until he had to acknowledge her. But security had stopped her, apologetic but firm. "Mr. Patterson has requested that we not allow you access to the building. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Mr. Patterson. So formal, so final. As if their years together had been reduced to surnames and legal documents. Blake had texted twice in those 3 weeks. The first message had come the day after she'd been locked out. "Hey, you make it home okay? Was thinking about you." She'd stared at those words, at the casual intimacy that had seemed so intoxicating and now felt like evidence of her own foolishness. She hadn't responded. The second message arrived a week later. "I guess you decided to make a clean break. I get it. Take care of yourself." The presumptuousness of it had made her laugh bitterly, as if she'd chosen this, as if this clean break was what she'd wanted. As if he'd mattered enough in the calculation to be worth choosing. She'd seen David once, by accident, at the grocery store they used to shop at together. He'd been in the produce section, examining avocados with that careful consideration he brought to even mundane decisions. She'd frozen in the pasta aisle, watching him through the gap in the shelves, her cart suddenly feeling like an anchor. He'd looked good. Tired maybe, thinner certainly, but good. Composed. Whole. Like someone who'd survived an amputation and was learning to function around the loss. She'd waited, paralyzed, as he completed his shopping and left, never knowing she was there, never looking for her in spaces they used to share. That night, she'd finally read the thread of messages she'd sent him during those 2 extra days. Looking at them with new eyes, she could see exactly what he must have seen, a series of carefully constructed lies, intimate enough to sound loving but vague enough to avoid scrutiny. Miss you sitting right next to decisions that proved the opposite. Can't wait to be home typed while she was planning to stay away longer. The worst part was how easily the lies had come, how naturally deception had flowed from her fingers. She'd always thought of herself as honest, as someone with integrity. But apparently, she'd only been those things when honesty didn't require sacrifice. Her mother knew now, she'd had to tell someone. The conversation had been worse than she'd imagined. "I don't understand," her mother had said, voice crackling over the phone. "Was he cruel to you? Was there something wrong in the marriage that we didn't see?" "No," she'd admitted. "He was good to me. He was always good to me." Then why? That was the question, wasn't it? Why did people destroy good things? Why did boredom feel like justification for betrayal? Why had she mistaken stability for stagnation, patience for weakness, trust for naivety? "I don't know," she'd answered, and it was the truest thing she'd said in months. Her father had been simpler, more direct. "You made your bed, sweetheart. Now you've got to lie in it." Then he'd hung up, and she'd understood that some disappointments were too large for immediate forgiveness. Work had been awkward. Sarah had apologized profusely for the photo, horrified that her social media post had been the catalyst. "I had no idea," she kept saying. "I thought you were just having fun. I didn't realize." But what could she possibly have realized? That adultery only counts if it's documented? That betrayal is fine as long as no one finds out? The office gossip had been swift and merciless. She was that woman, the one who'd cheated on her devoted husband, the cautionary tale whispered in break rooms. Never mind that most of them barely knew him, had only seen him at company events where he'd smiled and made small talk and been perfectly pleasant. He'd become a tragic hero in their narrative, and she'd become the villain. Now, sitting in her beige apartment on a Friday night, she scrolled through photos on her phone. There they were, 10 years of smiling faces, of trips and holidays and ordinary moments. Every photo a lie she'd believed, every memory now contaminated by what came after. She came to their wedding photos and paused. They'd looked so young, so certain. He'd cried when she walked down the aisle. She'd forgotten that. The photographer had captured it, his face in profile, eyes bright with tears, smile wide with joy. She'd teased him about it later. "I didn't know I was marrying such a romantic." "Only for you," he'd said, and she'd believed him, had felt special, chosen. She wondered if he'd thrown away his copies of these photos or if he'd kept them, boxed up in his own storage of memories too painful to look at but too significant to destroy. Her phone showed 11:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, it would be midnight, would be exactly 1 month since she'd sent that text about the conference extension. 1 month since she'd chosen a lie over her marriage, temporary pleasure over permanent commitment. The divorce would be final in 6 months, her attorney had said. A standard waiting period, time for reconciliation if both parties wanted it. But she knew there would be no reconciliation. Some broken things couldn't be repaired, some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, some trust, once shattered, could never be rebuilt. She'd done this. Not him, not circumstances, not the slow drift of years. Her. Her choices, her lies, her willingness to prioritize her wants over their vows. At 11:59, she opened a new message to him. She typed and deleted, trying to find words adequate to the enormity of her regret. Finally, simply, "I'm sorry. For all of it. You deserved better." She hit send and watched it deliver. Read receipt turned on. She saw the message show as read within seconds. He was awake, probably couldn't sleep either. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, his response, "Yes, I did. I hope you figure out what you're looking for. Goodbye." And that was it. The end of them, reduced to text messages and legal documents, to changed locks and divided assets, to goodbye on a Friday night in beige apartments and empty houses. She set her phone down and looked around at her new life, all the extra days she could want now, and nowhere she wanted to be. The 2 days she'd stolen had cost her everything, had taught her that some prices are only revealed after purchase, that freedom and happiness are not the same thing, that sometimes the cage we're desperate to escape was actually home. The locks had changed, yes. But the real barrier was permanent, built from her own choices, and no key could ever open it again.